God of the covenant and the mystery of the cross, you promise everlasting life to the world.
Gather all peoples into your arms,
Shelter us with your mercy, that we may
rejoice in the life we share in your Son, Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Genesis 15. This one's kind of disjointed, isn't it? I'm skipping some verses. Let's just read them anyway. 13 through. Let's just do 1 through 18. Everybody has their Bible. I'll read. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, You have given me no offspring, and so a slave born in my house is to be my heir. The word of the Lord came to him, This man shall not be your heir, and no one but your very own issue shall be your heir. He brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to count them. Then he said to him, So shall your descendants be. And he believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. Then he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? He said to him, Bring me a heifer, 3 years old, a female goat, 3 years old, a ram, 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. He brought him all these, and cut them in two, laying each half against the other. But he did not cut the birds in two. And when the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and a deep and terrifying darkness descended upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, Know this for certain, that your offspring shall be aliens in a land that is not theirs, and shall be slaves there, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for yourself, you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. So, why he brought him all of these and cut them in two, laying each half over against the other, but he did not cut the birds in two. I want to know why they didn't cut the birds in two. I've wanted to know this for years. Why? What's the deal?
I didn't find out about the birds, but I found out about the covenant.
Yeah.
That they would, to make a covenant, they would cut an animal in half and put the two halves apart. And then the person making the covenant would walk down the bloody path. And if they broke the covenant, they were to die. And even God was to die. But then Abram fell asleep, and in his dream, he saw a smoking pot and a torch go down that bloody path.
Yeah.
And that was God. So I found that out.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. But that's what they did with covenants, which I had never heard of. And then also I learned another thing from the commentaries. When you hear the words, do not be afraid, it's usually followed by good news.
Yeah.
Good news is about to be heard.
I hadn't thought of that, but when I think about it, yeah, every time I've.
So I learned that too. Those are the things I learned.
Those
That
are
still
good
doesn't
things to
tell us
learn.
why they didn't cut the birds now.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Well, I wonder.
maybe it's another part of the tradition. Maybe that's another part of the.
I think they were too squirmy.
Too tiny.
How big were they? That was,
Yeah.
Well, like so if the goat's cut in half was part of this like covenant ritual, maybe the birds symbolized other things, right? Like what kind of birds were they?
it didn't
A
say.
turtle dove and a young pigeon.
Yeah.
Oh, I did say.
Like maybe those symbolize something else of like these other ingredients they were adding to the ritual or something.
On the second day of Christmas. What
Maybe
day was
it's
the turtle
too
dove?
small.
2 turtle doves.
The other thing I think is fascinating about this, besides the obvious, covenant, God giving Abraham the covenant, is the fact that he was asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And how many times in Scripture does God come to folks when they're asleep. Or in a state of going to sleep or at night, or he comes to Joseph, Eli, Abram, Adam, Joseph in the New Testament. I think you can even argue Jacob at Peniel that was an evening kind of thing. Right? So God comes to us when we're, I think, most able to hear Him. Would be my assessment of that, but maybe you have other ideas.
Well,
I usually
the thing
have
that
to
always
sit
fascinates me with this is that God gives Abraham all these instructions to round up these animals and cut them in half, and then he causes a deep sleep to come on Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is he supposed to do this in his sleep, or?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
yeah, it.
I don't know. That's what's
Because
fascinating.
it's as if in the dream
You can see the torch and the smoking pot.
and he can see the animals. I mean, he's obviously seen this covenant ritual portrayed many times in his life at this point. Maybe not many times, but at least sometimes.
But maybe
So
excuse me.
So, he would know what it is, but whether, did he actually round up these animals and cut them in half, or did he just dream about it? And
Yeah, why couldn't that be part of the whole vision?
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I have no, but it's like, yeah.
But maybe he
Others-
isn't supposed to see God. Because when they were traveling through the wilderness, they didn't dare set eyes on God, because it would kill them.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Who knows?
Well, the other piece of the story is, obviously, the story of the promise of Abram is a long one in Genesis, and the tension in this story is one of Abraham's faithfulness, and whether or not he's going to continue, and Sarah or Sarai is a part of that as well. Obviously, they try to take matters into their own hands at one point, and that backfires. But eventually, Abraham and Sarah have a son named Isaac.
And how old was she when he was born? Old.
About 100.
Yeah, close to 100. At the very end of Abram's life, he doesn't have anything other than a cave to be buried in. That was the only land that he had. And so, even though God promises this in the front end, we see this tension between faith and faithfulness, during the entire story. At the end of Abram's life, he's got one son, one cave. That's it. But God's covenant still works through that, and that's really the important piece. This story isn't just as much. It's not as much about Abram as it is God's faithfulness to what God promises us.
But he also had Ishmael.
He did, and the Ishmaelites went off and modern day Islam. So,
Right.
So, yeah, we have the convergence of the three Abrahamic faiths here in Genesis. Well, Christianity happened sometime later. But that's the tension in the story, is whether or not Abram will keep the covenant, whether God will keep the covenant. Like you said, earlier about the two pieces of, how easy it was to not keep a covenant.
It's I think the covenant, that he will have these great nations come from his line. Your descendants, I give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. Like, what is it? Why is the land so special? I guess, I feel like we probably think of land differently now than they did then. But why is the covenant about the land rather than wherever you? Well, it is also wherever you go, I'll be with you. But
These agronomy, agriculture, and identity is probably a piece of it too. We see that happening in Ukraine right now, and how much the Ukrainians identify with that land. Those would be my guesses. From the river of Egypt. So the river of Egypt is the Nile. And that's the breadbasket of the Middle East. And then the Euphrates, that goes all the way to modern day Iraq. That goes through Baghdad, doesn't it? So it's quite a vast territory.
So the problem I have with this whole thing is I think it's a very cool story, the idea that the Israelites, God is making this great nation out of from Abraham and promising him this and doing it. The thing I have trouble with is this whole concept that the land is to be given to them, and we know later there's this enormous genocide of the Canaanites, and it's just very hard for me to believe that God is behind that. Jesus would completely negate that. If you believe that God is the Jesus image of God, Jesus would never do that, and it tells you that God is totally different here than he was at the time, than he was in how he's reflected in Jesus. And God doesn't change. So I think one of these things has to be wrong, and I think the Genesis has to be wrong. That's what I think. That's a Jewish story about the land, at least the land portion of it. I can completely believe making a nation out of one man, because you can have a lot of descendants, and I can believe God promised that to him. The whole business about the Canaanites and the taking I can believe the part about the descendants, but it's very hard for me to believe that this land is going to be given to them and they're going to take and they're going to kill everybody else.
Well, no, I hear you. I think if you go back to the creation story and Genesis 1, when he created humankind in his image, and he said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over all the living creatures. God said, see, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, Every tree with its seed and its fruit, you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth and to every bird. I mean, when I read this, and then if you read it through the lens of stewardship, and God asking us to be stewards of His creation, this is the land I give you. I mean, I kind of read it through that lens, but
Rather than a political lens, and rather than having to do with killing the inhabitants that are there.
there is some of that. I mean, obviously, but I think it's largely allegorical, as you suggest. But the problem is, well, I don't want to get into politics too much, but you know, we have a whole nation state of Israel that currently thinks that that's their land.
Oh, yeah.
And if the Palestinians come in, then and so that's a problem. So I think, yeah, if we take it too literally, then it can be pretty dangerous. So
We're seeing that. We're even seeing that in the church today. I mean, when you take, you know, that the baptismal covenant has to be spoken exactly as, you know, it was 2,000 years ago or whatever. They, you know, otherwise your baptism isn't valid.
yeah,
You know, which is going on in the Catholic Church right now.
Right, there was one priest who made a mistake for
Yeah.
years saying
Yeah.
we instead of I,
Yeah.
and none of his baptisms now are valid.
Yeah, that just strikes me as completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think the beauty of Genesis, and I mean, because the other part of Genesis that, you know, we never, with regard to Abraham, is in chapter 25. It talks about him after Sarah dies, he takes another wife and gives birth to a whole slew of
I
sons.
know, here it is, 100 years old.
Yeah, he gives birth to yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
That
And
bothered me a lot.
it probably should.
but well, you know, so you know, are they telling stories? Yeah, I think they are. You know what? But the power of the story is, you know, this is, you know, our identity. This is who we are, and like you say, the problem with that is that when you hang on to, instead of trusting God to continue to be faithful to what, you know, what his living up to his side of the covenant, they misinterpret that, and make it so, basically, you know, make it workable so that they can live up to what they see as their side of the covenant. But, you know, what God is asking of them, I think is the same thing that Jesus asks of us. You know, and it's just that they chose to make it workable for them. And I think we do the same thing over and over again as humans.
Well, I'm sure we would, and we have. I mentioned this in a previous class that when the Pilgrims first came over, they brought diseases with them. Well, it wasn't the Pilgrims; it was some of the people that came ahead of the Pilgrims, and they brought diseases with them that wiped out the native population, and the settlers were aware of this. They knew, you know, there were bodies everywhere, and people that died. It knocked out 90% of the native population. Well, they interpreted that to mean that God was killing all these people so that they could have the land, and that became the way that Americans thought for 100, 200 years, or 400 years probably. So, yeah, we've done that.
We've done, yeah.
Well, and like we start to hear about like what the nation of Israel, right? Like God's chosen people. But like by God choosing these people, that inherently means that he didn't choose everyone else, right? And then Jesus flips the script on that, and it's like, no, we open this to everybody, not just this small group of people that identify as Israelites. But yeah, it's hard to reconcile that because it feels very colonizer-y.
Well, if you some of the stuff I read by rabbis today, written about that subject in the Jews, about them being the chosen people, the way their educated people see it today is that God chose them to be his priest people, to minister to the world, to be a beacon to the world, not necessarily to own and conquer the world, but to be a light, which is interesting because that's what Jesus is, a light. But the Jews see themselves as a light as well, to show people how to live. And I think they really do try very hard to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to move on?
I'll read out. This is Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to eat up my flesh, my adversaries and my foes, it is they who stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war arise against me, yet I will be confident. One thing have I asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, to inquire in his temple. For he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will lift me high upon a rock. And now my head shall be lifted up above my enemies all around me. And I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing and make melody to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Be gracious to me and answer me. You have said, seek my face. My heart says to you, your face, Lord, do I seek. Hide not your face from me. Turn not your servant away in anger. O you who have been my help. Cast me not off. Forsake me not, O God of my salvation. For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me in. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me in on a level path because of my enemies. Give me not up to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me. They breathe out violence. I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord.
Sometimes that waiting can take a long time.
Mm-hmm. Again, I see this, when you, in reading Psalm 27, it's like, it speaks of the reality of this world. are the things that we encounter. Whether you call it adversarial, enmity, it's the reality of living in this world.
I think it's an appropriate Lenten psalm because it talks about trust in God and really remaining steadfast in the faith despite the world. Do not turn your servant away in anger.
The line that when I read that, every time I read this psalm, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. And I think, and how, God basically, told David that I don't need a temple. Why are you wanting to build me a temple? And as I think of that, and I think of, why would God want a temple when he has created, when you take a look around you, take time to take in all the beauty that surrounds us. What is it about man that we can build God a more beautiful temple that God's already built for himself or herself?
That's a good point. That's a good point.
What is it about us that thinks that as human beings?
Well, I'll tell you what it did for David. I mean, the idea of having, or what it would have done for David, is it would give him a lot of power, because what happened is when the temple was situated in Jerusalem, and everybody had to come to Jerusalem to worship and sacrifice in the temple, and it made Jerusalem an important city, and people who controlled the temple controlled everybody else. So, I mean, it's a way of having power, I say.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, it was all about power and control.
It's cast in pious terms. It's actually about power.
Yeah.
But it's for the benefit of man, so that they have a place where they can go and worship God, I guess.
Well, are they really benefiting? I mean, why couldn't they just worship at home and not have to make an 80-mile trek?
Just worship virtually.
Well, I think, when we talk about this, how, when we're going to the conversations, I don't know, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, Chris, about talking about the process of.
Then don't. What were you going to say?
It's, how do we, what is it that we attach so much, that we end up attaching so much love in, or comfort in? I think it's more the idea of comfort. That we can't let go of it. That's the struggle.
It seems to me the way that the Israelites or the Jews would have seen temple as a place of sacrifice, and sacrifice was something that went on in pagan religions before the Jews were people, and I think they carried on with this idea. Everybody seemed to think, the whole ancient world seemed to think that the way to get favor of God, of their gods, any god, is to sacrifice to them, and So they feel like if they do this sacrifice, then they're going to have prosperity. And God says over and over, what I want is a standard of behavior and conduct rather than a sacrifice. The temple was basically, to me, carrying on a pagan idea. And they couched it in terms of this being God, but it was carrying on a pagan idea, and it was seeding the power there. And I personally think that's why it eventually got destroyed, and why Jesus was saying that the temple is, now it was supposed to be a house of prayer, but it's a den of thieves, and it's not serving any purpose. It's going to disappear. I don't know if God ever wanted it or ever liked it. It was a man-made creation, man-made thought, and something left over from pre-Jehovah days. But do we attach? You say why do we attach special significance to a building? Well, I think in our day, I think people grow up going to church, and this is God's house, and we get a certain feeling that we've grown up with when we're in the sanctuary. And I remember being a little girl and going with my grandmother into the sanctuary, and during the week she was doing something there. I'm running down the aisle, and she's, "Oh no, we don't run in God's house. We don't do that." And so you just get that, and so that's something that's, I think it's taught from a very young age, and it stays with you. You can always have that feeling. But I think the temple, the same thing. People, this is their tradition from ancient times, passed down from one to the other.
But it was a place where people could come together, believers could come together, and that's important too, I think.
But they also did that in synagogues and things other than the temple. I know what you mean. They gathered people from all over the Jews from all over the world in that time. But it was also a place of exclusion. They got together, it was a place of exclusion. Only the priests could go in the very inner sanctum. Only the men could go in a certain area. The women were confined in another spot. The Gentiles were confined to another spot. So, a very stratified place. Right. You're not really completely together in the temple. You're not together completely as a people. You're separated out by this hierarchy, this man-made hierarchy.
Yeah, I think we saw that a lot at the time of the resurrection as well, right? Even Catholic churches, it wasn't until the last 100 years that they started worshiping in English, or the common language. It was all in Latin, right? So which was part of their tradition and they found sacred, but how many of these sacred traditions do we have are very exclusive instead of inclusive? That, they didn't have translations of the Bible. That was one of the things Luther did, right? Was translate it into a common language, because they were holding the Bible hostage so that it wasn't widely accessible. So respecting that buildings and rituals have sacredness for each of us, but that those meanings can change, and it doesn't mean that it's less holy, right? Like when I was growing up, right, a generation or two after all of you, that we were encouraged, not during the worship service, but like when we would have youth lock-ins, you'd play hide and seek in the sanctuary, and they wanted us to run around in the sanctuary so that we felt comfortable there, that it could be a playground, and so then how do you bridge that gap between me that has hid under a lot of pews, jumping out and scaring people in the middle of the night, with older generations that feel like that's really disrespectful, to kids now that they're not comfortable coming to church until we reopen the nursery, or because they don't want to be judged for having their loud kids in church, or how do we make the sanctuary a space for everyone that's meeting everybody's needs? And that, playing and running around in the sanctuary can be sacred.
Move on to Philippians.
Mhm.
I'll read it. Brothers and sisters, join in imitating me, and observe those who live according to the example you have in us. For many live as enemies of the cross of Christ. I have often told you of them, and now I tell you even with tears. Their end is destruction, their God is the belly, and their glory is in their shame. Their minds are set on earthly things, but our citizenship is in heaven, and it is from there that we are expecting a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. He will transform the body of our humiliation that it may be conformed to the body of his glory, by the power that also enables him to make all things subject to himself. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, my beloved. Who are the ones who are living as enemies of the cross of Christ?
Those would be the Romans and probably the Epicureans.
Well,
There's
in my comments here, they say here, in particular, the Jews who refuse to admit their guilt under the law and refuse to accept that Jesus' accursed death, crucifixion, was really for their sakes. So that they didn't believe that Jesus' death had anything to do with their need for forgiveness.
Were the Philippians being persecuted? It almost sounds like he's trying to comfort them, these enemies of the cross of Christ. Are they persecuting them and maybe they don't have enough food, and talking about people who have lots and I don't know enough about the Philippians and what their history was.
When I mentioned the Epicurean is a person devoted to sensual enjoyment, especially that derived from fine food and drink. So they were very hedonistic and gluttonous. Their philosophy was have fun, party on.
Drink and be merry.
Yeah, and the Stoics are on the other end of that spectrum. The Stoics are just completely the complete opposite. And Paul uses both of the Stoic and the Epicurean philosophies in his rhetoric and in his letters, especially in Corinthians and in Philippians. So he says their end is the destruction, their God is the belly, and their glory is in their shame. Their minds are set on earthly things. That is a direct comment to the Epicureans. But our citizenship's a political word Paul uses to talk about our belonging to God instead of the Roman Empire, essentially. Citizenship would have been high on their minds as Romans, which Philippi was.
He was a Roman.
Yes, No, Paul definitely was a Roman.
And Paul too.
Yeah. He will transform the body of our humiliation that it may be conformed to the body of his glory. So he's contrasting the body of Christ, which is the body of suffering. He's trying to help them understand that what you think is glory, what you think is feel good is not, that is not the way to live as a Christian. The way to live as a Christian is to imitate this body of Christ. I think he even uses the word imitate, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. Brothers and sisters, join in imitating me and observe those who live according to the example you have in us. So this is really a moral text that Paul was writing.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense if the Philippians were sort of extravagant, and he's calling them like, don't identify as Philippians, identify as God's people.
Yeah.
And that would make sense, like morally. Like,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But Paul's got three different groups on his mind when he writes this: the Romans, the Stoics, and the Epicureans. And none of them get out. Easy.
Yeah.
He will transform, metaschematise is literally to transfigure, or to reveal change. So to reveal the change in our body, he will transform our suffering into the glorious body of Christ. To be conformed to the body of his glory by the power that also enables him to make all things subject to himself. It's no mistake that when he says to make things all subject to himself, that's a direct contrast to Caesar, making Romans subject to himself. This is very, the undertones of this text are very anti-empirical. Whom I love, let's see, therefore my brothers and sisters whom I love and long for, my joy and my crown, stand firm in the Lord. In this way, my beloved. So this is how you live in the midst of. And I think it goes back to it fits well with the psalm that we just read, and all of the, as Glenn pointed out, with the worldly influences that are enemies, that become our enemies, and putting our trust in God alone.
So does everybody else have a PS
No.
in their Philippians 4?
Where?
I mean, I have a little section in my Bible that says, P.S. Say hello for me to all the Christians there. The brothers with me send their greetings too. And all the other Christians here want to be remembered to you, especially those who work in Caesar's palace. The blessings of our Lord Jesus Christ be upon your spirit.
Yeah.
I think that's commentary.
Yeah.
That's his comment.
Mine's called Final Greeting and Benediction.
Oh,
Greet
Oh.
every saint in Christ Jesus. The friends who are with me greet you. All the saints greet you, especially those of the emperor's household.
huh.
Because he wrote this while he was in prison.
Yes, he was in prison in Philippi.
But it's a joyful thank you letter from Paul to his good friends. Paul wrote it while he was in jail.
Yeah.
This is the basis for your message tonight.
Yeah, with Paul and Silas.
Paul and Silas in prison in Philippi.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think. He was in prison more than once.
But I think the thing about Philippi is that it was a very wealthy city and
Oh yeah.
and a very prominent city. First in the old in the Greek Macedonian Empire, that it was the home base for Alexander the Great, and the wealth of Philippi helped him expand his empire. And so, yeah, it was also attracted
Yeah, it was kind of a hub on the Mediterranean,
Yeah,
a trade center.
trade route. It was right on the major trade route between Rome and Asia.
Yep, in Africa.
Right. So,
Cool.
This one verse, you were asking me that when we were waiting for the service to begin, we were out in the lobby. And she was asking me about favorite verses. And I was trying to think of this one and I couldn't think of it. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice.
Okay, cool.
That's one of my favorites.
I'll put it in. Mark it in the Bible.
it isn't one verse, but it's passage right before this that, where Paul says that, you know, I have not made, not that I have already obtained this or am already perfect, but I press on to make it my own because Christ Jesus has made me his own. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal, for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Let those of us who are mature think this way. If in anything you think otherwise, God will reveal that also to you. Only let us hold true to what we have attained. I think, and I know some of my friends, if I don't remember, I can't find a bulletin from my ordination, but I know that I have friends who used that phrase, that passage about call to ministry, what their call, how they saw their call. There's no doubt that the church in Philippi held a very special place in Paul's heart. Because of what he experienced there, and also their generosity after he left. The church was well known.
That's where I met Lydia.
Okay.
And the welcoming of Lydia and her family into the fold, and he baptized Lydia's family, and then she was Jewish, and then this jailer that I'm talking about tonight, he was a pagan. He wasn't anything. He was just a regular guy, and he ends up baptizing him and his family and welcoming him. So this is in the book of Acts. So you have these bookend conversions. One's Jewish, one's Gentile, and it's really a story about inclusion. But I'm gonna talk about prayer as the context for this entire thing. But that all happened. I know it took place in Philippi.
So,
Yeah.
Luke 13. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, And I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.
Instead of being enemies, the Pharisees were actually like friends. They were warning him that Herod wanted to kill him, which was out of character for the Pharisees.
Well, he said some Pharisees, so,
Uh-huh.
you know,
Yeah.
I think there were clearly some Pharisees that were on his side. I mean, you know, Joseph of Arimathea, wasn't he a Pharisee? Was he a
I
Pharisee?
don't know.
I thought he was in
If he
the
was
Sanhedrin
not.
council or something.
Yeah, he would have. Joseph and Nicodemus would have been part of, whether they were Pharisees, I don't know, you know, they were definitely Sadducees, and part of the Sadducean council of the temple.
But here they were being helpful, or trying to be, which was out of character for them.
You know, he's saying that about Jerusalem. I've always wondered about that. You know, the city kills the prophets, and how often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood, and you were not willing. Is he saying that he was rejected in Jerusalem prior to this time? Or is this something that's referring to his ultimate crucifixion as almost the back, you know, the foreshadowing of that? Is it more a reference to what he might have said after death?
It sounds as though previous prophets were killed in Jerusalem. Who would that have been?
Well, yeah, it definitely feels foreshadowing because he's like, well, this day, today, and tomorrow, and the day after that, but then after that. So like, he's definitely giving us this like 3-day thing. Today, tomorrow, and the next day, I'll be on my way.
It seems like he, throughout his ministry, he's you know, attacking the people in power. But he's never said anything about a whole city until he gets to this, at least that I recall, until he gets to Jerusalem. And I was wondering what in the heck, you know, I mean, killing the prophets and stone those who are sent to, you know, I'm assuming that happened before, but with himself, he wanted to gather them and protect them that they rejected. I don't recall any stories about that happening until he was crucified, until the last week.
Quite honestly, you're going to kill me if I say this, but I don't even know if Jesus said this. I mean, that's what I want to know. Is this something Luke just inserted, or is this an original saying of Jesus?
That's right. I feel like it's also out of context, which I guess would maybe be, is this Luke's aside of like, while they were in Jerusalem, he's mad at Jerusalem for killing Jesus or something. But, because he's in the middle of all of his parables.
So this text, this particular text, it's only found in Luke. So this is pure Lucan material. It's not corroborated by any other gospels. So we have to wrestle with that a little bit, but to me, I mean, you read this, Jesus sounds whiny to me. I mean,
Sounds whiny.
whiny.
It almost sounds like Shakespeare, like it's dramatic.
Yeah.
You know, like Jerusalem, Jerusalem.
Right.
It's this like little monologue.
Where does Jesus? Yeah. Yep.
Well, I'm wondering if it's not Luke just making a point that Jerusalem rejected Jesus and he was crucified there, or maybe he's using it rhetorically as the whole body of the Jewish people, and Jesus wanted to save them, and yet they didn't recognize him and they rejected him. You know, is it something, you know, like an overarching sort of a parabolic statement, you know, by Luke?
Yeah, I do think the Pharisees probably did come to him and mentioned Herod, and I could see Jesus saying, "Go and tell that fox, listen, I'm casting out demons, performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work." I don't know. You get to verse 34 though, and
It's almost like it doesn't fit with the rest of the narrative. Like something stuck in there as a
correct.
rhetorical comment.
I've always had a problem with this text, so thank God I'm not preaching on it this week. But
We won't tell.
Is it a regular Lenten text or just in the Luke year?
yeah, no, it's a lectionary.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a Luke lectionary for Lent. I could see him saying, "Blessed is." I could see him saying, I just don't like 34. After that,
Yeah, that's my question. That's the part that's always bothered me. I remember reading that as a little kid and wondering about that.
yeah, it just seems so out of place. But then 35, see your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord." I can understand him saying that, and that's a prophetic statement because that's what they say as he enters Jerusalem. So
Yeah, and the stuff he said to tell Herod, well, when Herod, when he's brought before Herod, that's what Herod wants to see him do. He says, "Tell him I'm doing this." And Herod says, "Okay, show me. I would like to see this."
yeah. I hope I didn't destroy everybody's faith in Jesus Christ. I mean, it's problematic to me. The study Bible says Jerusalem is the focus of the impending confrontation. So I think, you read that as this is okay. It's a lament. This is a lament statement about Jerusalem as the place he's going to die.
And the problem with lament is lament can always.
Sounds
I mean,
like
it always sounds like it can always. I mean, how many of the Psalms?
Right.
When you read the psalmists and people who lament, who are generally lamenting, it sounds like they're whining.
Yeah.
But they aren't. They're expressing their own
anguish,
their own desperation, their own despair, devastation, and I think, in that regard of Jesus anticipating what going to Jerusalem is going to mean, the devastation that it's going to mean for him is very real. And so, and that lamenting is very much a part of being human. That who among us hasn't lamented? And when we had lamented, be accused of whining.
Well, back to
I think the other piece of this is that it does not identify which Herod, because the parallel context that my Bible talks about is that this is Jesus talking he's in the part of Judea that is east of the Jordan River, which would have been the territory of Herod Antipas.
that's what my study Bible gets correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was when he's talking here about Herod, it's not Herod the Great. It's not the Herod in Jerusalem. It's his brother Herod Antipas.
The smaller.
Yeah.
The more parochial
But
ruler.
this is-
Less important.
And so, but why? And so that raises the question: why would this Herod be wanting to get? Other than they just want Jesus he just wants Jesus out of this territory.
Well, that's why I go back to the commentary earlier about these Pharisees. I don't read it as a warning, as a friendly warning from them. I read it as a taunt.
Right.
Oh,
I read it
okay.
as they're twisting the knife.
Right.
Okay.
I don't read it as in any terms of goodwill.
No, it's they're just wanting
Okay,
him out of.
I can see
they're-
that too, yeah.
They're wanting him out of their country,
Right.
out
Yeah.
of their part of Judea.
They're just triangling with Herod so they don't have to be the bad guys. I mean,
Yeah.
they're using him as an excuse because they're too cowardly to tell him themselves. So that's the way I read it.
So it's
That's
kind
probably
of
the
like
best.
in an old western when the good guy comes to town to clean out the outlaws, and they come and they say, "We don't want you here. Get out of here."
Yeah.
Somebody's going to kill you if you don't leave.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, the other part of this then is Jesus saying, look, he's gonna be going to Jerusalem. Jerusalem's the important place here anyway. You guys, you really don't matter all that much.
Mhm.
That's why it was Herod the Great versus Herod Antipas, that how much do you think you really matter?
Yeah.
I think, and I think, that again speaks to me this passage, and I've never enjoyed it coming up. And it's
I always get
much
this.
easier
Yeah,
to
this-
preaching about the Philippians than.
I
which
just
often
get this
do.
image of this rooster or hen out on the farm, like, like
Well,
trying to protect the young.
It's interesting you bring up that image because that's one of the images I have read, and they talk about Jesus and the nature of Jesus, and it's one of the Jesus is portrayed in both masculine and feminine terms, and this is a motherly
Feminine.
term that's describing characteristics of the female to Jesus, of the mother who's going to take care of her babies.
Yeah.
And so it's from that standpoint, I think it's kind of a beautiful thing. I know you're thinking about these chickens.
Right.
I mean, it is it is a very, that a mother is
Maternalistic.
willing to sacrifice
Herself for the
that's
babies.
their life and from a hawk to protect their babies, because that's what they would be. A bird of prey is what they would be protecting their chicks from, and
The hawks.
yeah.
Well,
So
the Pharisees definitely were the ones in the category of the unwilling.
right.
And so in that regard, the statement fits, but I would, have fun. I preached on this 3 years ago, and I can't remember
What you said?
what I said.
I was
Probably
gonna ask you if
nothing
you
much
pull out an
good.
old sermon I could,
I wouldn't depend on anything I said. But today, as I sit here and read this, I'm fascinated by verse 34. I'm going to go look at the commentary right now after we get done.
Well, there's another kind of a parallel passage to this. I don't remember from where. But again, I remember reading this as a little kid. And it said, like children, Jerusalem, you're like children playing in the marketplace. We mourned for you and you wouldn't cry, and we played pipes for you and you wouldn't dance. And it's the same thing, you wouldn't respond.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't remember where that's from, but it's the same image that you tried to reach Jerusalem and no response.
Yeah, well,
And in that respect, the connection between the second reading in the gospel, because Jerusalem and Philippi were both such important cities, vital to the empire. They were very,
it's true.
and tend to see themselves that way.
when I think of Jesus speaking, I don't think, I mean, pardon, forgive me, Lord, but I don't think of eloquence. I don't think of poetic imagery. I think when Jesus speaks, it's urgent, it's direct. It's not unloving, it's loving, but it's often just get to the point. And I just, this is difficult for me to see him saying this.
Well, I think, yeah, if it's difficult for us to hear, I mean, how difficult was it for the people of his day to hear?
I noticed the last word on this sheet. It said, take time this week to begin a list of those things you believe God wants you to do in your lifetime.
Lifetime, you know,
Wow.
we're in good life, you know, because we got short lifetime left. And
Oh, that's,
Some of us shorter
we just, we,
So I have to keep that.
I'm not as threatened by that as I used to be.
Neither am I. If you're not, I am not either.
I was like, yeah, used to doing that.
Our
Father,
Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
we don't need yours.
One currently.
How are you?
5.
How are you? Good.